There we go. All right. This is Geoffrey Cravero, and with me is Diana Dizon, and I'm conducting an oral history with Dr. Annie Ruth Jackson Gavin. The interview is being conducted through a Zoom cloud meeting on Thursday, November 17th, 2022. Dr. Gavin, thank you for speaking with us today. Could you begin?
My
please?
pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Would you begin, please, by stating your name for us and telling us a bit about where you're from and what life was like for you growing up?
My name is Annie Ruth Jackson Gavin. I grew up here in Oviedo, Florida. Life was pretty simple. It was country living. It was far more rural than Oviedo is now, but it was pleasant. There were probably things going on that I was not aware of, but as a child, I was not aware of those things.
And where did you attend elementary school? And could you describe your experience and some memories that stand out to you?
I attended the Oviedo schools or colors. They went through name changes, but my first memory is of the old building on Division Street. The old building was right across the street from Fountainhead Missionary Baptist Church, which now it still stands, but it's in a different location. It's actually in the location where the old school was. I was 5 when I started there, so I'm not sure exactly what the name of it was, the formal name, but it was referred to as the Oviedo School for Colored Children. That much I remember. The building was large, it was old, the desks were big desks. I remember that my feet didn't touch the floor. I was 5 and I was too small for the desk. And I guess, as I recall, most of the desks were the same size. So I guess you were supposed to, as long as you were there, you grew into the desk. I remember the outdoor toilet. We did not have indoor plumbing. We had a faucet on the outside from which we drank water. And I remember being a little scared to go to the bathroom because it was big with many stalls and there were vines overhanging it. So when it rained, it was not bad when the sun was shining, but when it rained, it was really dark and dreary. But in the middle of my first grade year is when we moved to a new building in a different location. And actually, that first building is where the current Jackson Heights Middle School sits. It's an expanded building now, of course. But when I moved from the first grade in the old building to the new building, and it was only one building, grades 1, 2, 3, and 4, the school was being called the Oviedo Negro School. I have not seen any documents that said particularly Oviedo Negro School, but that is what I remember it being referred to as when I was in the first grade. The school expanded. We got a second building and the school was expanded to grades 5 and 6. And then later on, we got a third building. By now, the school is going from grades 1 through 8. There was never a kindergarten per se in the building when I went there. So it went from the Oviedo Negro School to the Jackson Heights Elementary School, which was formally named in 1961. And it was named for my grandfather, Henry Jackson, who basically settled in the area, not on the site where the school is located, but in close proximity. And at the time, no one was back here in the woods as it was referred to at the time, except for the Jacksons and the Moores, who lived not too far from us. So it became Jackson Heights Elementary School in 1961 in honor of Henry Jackson, my grandfather. And then it became integrated in 67, 68. But I graduated from the 8th grade in 1961. By that time, it was still Jackson Heights Elementary School. In 1967, 68, with integration, what had formerly been a school for all Negro children was integrated. Then in 1971, when it became a middle school, it was renamed Jackson Heights Middle School. But I'm proud that it has retained the name Jackson over the years.
Do you remember some of your favorite teachers?
Yes, all of them were favorites. My first grade teacher was Miss Annie Stokes. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Ida Anderson, who in fact was the sister of the principal of the school, Stanley T. Muller. Mr. Muller was my principal for my entire stay at Jackson Heights Elementary School. My third grade teacher was Mrs. McClendon. My fourth grade teacher was Ophelia Jones Moore, who was one of the last teachers to be at Jackson Heights when it was integrated. I think Mrs. Moore and Mr. Muller were the only two of the original staff that were still there. He was still principal, of course. My fifth and sixth grade teacher, I had this teacher back to back for 2 years, was Miss Louise Williams. As a matter of fact, Miss Williams was my teacher in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. In the 8th grade, I had Mr. Humphrey, and that was my first experience with a male teacher. Until that time, I had not encountered any male teachers, and all of my teachers had been, all of my teachers had been female until the 8th grade, and they were all Black, as were all of the students. All of my classmates were Black from the time that I entered elementary school to the time that I graduated from high school. But I was at Jackson. I was at the Oviedo Negro School / Jackson Heights Elementary School from 1953 to 1961, which is when I graduated from the 8th grade.
Tell us about your grandfather, Henry Jackson.
Well, my grandfather was a child of enslaved parents. His parents had several children. They worked for, obviously, a white family that really took my grandfather under their wings and brought him. He grew up in Georgia. They brought him to Florida with them at a young age, taught him to read and write. And subsequently, he was given his 40 acres and a mule. He actually was given 40 acres on both sides of what is Long Lake. And he actually homesteaded the property in 1910, farmed, also had a crew that did work for other people, but he farmed, raising beans, peas, corn, peanuts, the usual for the time. He had an only child who was my father, Moses Elijah, who in turn had 10 of us, 9 girls and 1 boy. There are 5 of us that are surviving. We lost two siblings within the past year. There were 7 of us, and then we went from 7 to 5.
So I think you mentioned high school, but could you tell us a little bit about some of the differences between your elementary and your high school experiences?
Well, first of all, I guess the biggest thing that stands out is the fact that for my entire time in elementary school, I walked to school. When I went to 9th grade, of course, there was a county school for Black children, which was Crooms Academy High School, which was in Sanford. So from 9th grade through 12th grade, I caught the bus 5 days a week, along with all of the other children. And we were bused to Crooms Academy High School. That was the primary difference. The other difference was I met more children who had different experiences, because we thought Sanford was, quote, the city at the time. So those children had different experiences than we had out in Oviedo. They had movie theaters, they had art museums and those kinds of cultural activities. The opera came to Sanford. None of those things came to Oviedo. As I recall, we had a movie theater, but the only time that Blacks could go to that theater was basically on Saturday afternoon. And all I ever remember seeing were Westerns. Nothing else, just Westerns. But those were the primary differences between elementary school and high school. Although in high school, everybody looked just like me there again, because I graduated from high school in 1965, and the schools were not integrated at that time.
How did those formative years in school inspire you yourself to become an educator?
I loved my teachers. They were always present. I don't ever remember my teachers being absent. They were always smiling. They were well dressed, well spoken, and very encouraging. And not only did I see them at school, but I also saw them at church, because most of the teachers lived in the neighborhood. So we saw them at school, we saw them at church, and we saw them in the marketplace. Basically, wherever we went, we saw them, and they were always the same. They always acknowledged us and called us by our names and hugged us and told us how proud they were of us. So, and my music teacher in particularly inspired me. She was my cradle roll teacher in Sunday school. That was a class for 4 and 5-year-olds at the time. She was pretty, and she always smelled so good, and I wanted to be just like her. And to a child, those things are important, and she would always give you a hug. So they were role models for me. And at the time, parents encouraged you to be a teacher. Teachers were looked up to and well respected, or they wanted you to be a doctor. Not many people talked about kids being lawyers, because most of the families were poor working families. And so some things to them were out of reach, but they knew that you could go to college and become a teacher and come back to the community and be well respected. If you went away and you became a doctor or a lawyer or something else important, the importance being in their heads, they were proud of you. But basically, they encouraged you to be teachers. And at the time, of course, when I went to college, that was one of the fields where you didn't really have a problem getting a job.
Did you attend that reunion several years back of the Oviedo Colored Schools?
I did not, because unfortunately, I did not know about it until it was over. And I was really disappointed because it would have been wonderful to just come back and see everybody and relive some of those old experiences, because those times were really happy times.
Could you describe for us the Oviedo Colored School Museum project? How did you become involved and what's the current status?
I became involved because basically Judith Smith-Jones recruited me. And she talked about the vision and the mission for the school, which I really bought into, because I think it's really important to preserve the artifacts and for people to understand, know, and appreciate the history of the colored schools. Our grant, I don't know if Judith told you or not, but the one grant that we applied for, our first time applying for a grant, was funded. And so now we are in the process of having those monies transferred to us, because there were things that took place that we had nothing to do with. It was a long time before they assigned a manager for the grant to us. Now that we have a manager, things are moving, but we're still waiting to actually get the money so that we can start doing the renovations that are so much needed in the building, which, by the way, is one of the original schools for colors. It was started in the church in Jamestown, and that church still stands. It's owned by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but they are allowing us to lease it for 25 years. And after that point, we'll decide. They will decide.
Thanks. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or expand on? Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is that before the University of Central Florida became the University of Central Florida, I think it was Florida Technical College or Florida Technical University, someone, a student from the university, came out and interviewed my grandfather, tape recorded it, and that tape exists somewhere. So it may be in the archives at UCF, I don't know, but I would love to get my hands on it, wherever it is.
Well, we can certainly look into that. I'd like to get my hands on that as well and hear that.
That would be great.
Well, Dr. Gavin, thanks again for sharing your time and speaking with us today. This has been Geoffrey Cravero with Diane Dizon and Dr. Annie Ruth Jackson Gavin on November 17th, 2022.
Thank you so much.